Mr. Smyth, Cathy Newman from Channel 4 News. We're told that you beat young men until they bled. Why did you do that?
I'm not talking about that.
John Smyth's barbaric abuse of boys and young men in 3 different countries has plunged the Church of England into its biggest crisis in living memory. Yesterday, the Archbishop of Canterbury took the unprecedented decision to quit after admitting he felt a deep sense of shame that he hadn't done enough to stop Smyth's abuse. Now there are growing calls for the bishops, who also failed in their duties, to follow his lead and resign.
In Justin's letter, he said that he was taking institutional responsibility. But the reality is that he's not the only person that is named within the report. There are a number of other bishops, a number of other clergy people that are also named. And I think they need to think very carefully about their responsibility and their accountability.
The Make-In review published last week revealed that Smyth, a distinguished barrister and friend of the Archbishop of Canterbury, was the most prolific serial abuser in the history of the Church of England. But as well as seriously criticising the Archbishop of Canterbury over his handling of the Smyth scandal, multiple bishops were also named in the report. The Make-In review revealed that no fewer than 5 serving bishops or archbishops and 5 retired bishops and archbishops knew something of John Smyth's abuse over many decades. The 5 serving bishops and archbishops include Bishop of Lincoln, Stephen Conway, the Bishop for Episcopal Ministry in the Anglican Communion, Joe Bailey-Wells, the Bishop of Guildford, Andrew Watson, who was himself a victim of Smyth's abuse in the 80s, and the current Archbishop of Cape Town, Dr. Thabo Makgoba. Because he wasn't stopped in the UK, Smyth was able to move to Zimbabwe and then South Africa, abusing boys and young men right up until his death in 2018.
In the last few days, I've seen an internal email to bishops of the Church of England saying that they're now looking at what criteria should apply in deciding whether to hold bishops to account for safeguarding failings. But even now, even in 2024, even after the Make-In report has been released, there is no process in place in the Church by which bishops can be investigated, let alone disciplined, for any kind of safeguarding failures.
Today, several bishops released new statements. Andrew Watson, the Bishop of Guildford, said, "My prayers remain first and foremost with my fellow victims of Smyth's abuse. I am personally aware that this is a time of heightened emotion for many, which I share. I pray for some kind of closure for those who have waited so long for it." Bishop Joe Bailey-Wells defended her failure to ensure Smyth was reported to the police in 2013. She said, "The reason I did not follow up on the police report was because I was assured that others were doing that, and I had no reason not to trust that assurance. In hindsight, I regret that I did not do more to verify the assurances given or query assumptions." Meanwhile, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba denied receiving a letter from the UK warning about Smyth's abuse and said today he was urgently requesting details of the abuser's activities in South Africa. The lead bishop for safeguarding, Joanne Grenfell, today held a webinar for Smyth's victims, but in a measure of their disillusionment with the Church, only around half a dozen attended. The Archbishop of Canterbury's closest allies told me this week they think he was a lightning rod for the failure of others. They accept he had to quit, but believe other senior colleagues now need to look to their own consciences. Justin Welby has promised to meet Smyth's victims, something he delayed doing for years. When he does, they'll be demanding that he uses the rest of his time as Church of England leader to ensure full accountability. Tonight, Smyth's victims were told they'd be getting a personal letter from Justin Welby offering a meeting shortly.
Cathy Newman reporting. Well, with me here is the Bishop of Gloucester, Rachel Treweek. Don't all of these 5 bishops just need to go? You haven't got a hope of getting away from this scandal unless they do.
So absolutely, we need to be held accountable. I do want to say at the very beginning that the focus must remain on the victims and survivors. And I do want to start off by saying this report is a sickening report, and absolutely it's important that we acknowledge the awful pain horrific abuse that these victims and survivors have endured and continue to endure, because this is very re-traumatising. So I do want to say that at the beginning. Of course, people need to be held accountable, and I'm sure that that work is being carried out now. I think it's really important, from what we heard just then, that people don't just blame other people. We all need to say...
But it's quite vague to say they need to be held accountable. Shouldn't those 5 bishops, who all failed to do enough, resign?
I think anyone who has failed to do what they should have done needs to be held accountable. If resignation is part of that, that's what needs to happen. I also want to say...
Why won't you say it, that they should?
Because I don't know all the details.
Well, we know that they're in the report as people who didn't do enough.
I also want to say that if we think that resignations will actually solve everything, that isn't the case. I also want to say that the light must be shone on those who in the 70s, 80s and 90s actually were involved in cover-up. I mean, it's horrific reading when you look at the clergy. And it's not just the church. No, and if you look at the clergy at that time in the report, who said they were acting in the name of the gospel, that's not the Jesus Christ I know. They must be held accountable too. Actually, where now are those people who actually did that cover-up, said it was in the name of the church and protecting people? That is horrendous and must be held accountable.
I mean, but that's why I'm saying that, you know, it's being held accountable is still a pretty vague way to put it. Isn't the truth now that you just need a clear out? You know, your institution is collapsing unless you start again and you get rid of all of these people, because no one's going to have any faith in you.
So what I want to say is that what this is revealing is a complete systemic failure in the church. The culture that we have...
So you need to start again, don't you?
Well, I don't know that necessarily starting again. A number of things have changed in our safeguarding culture.
Yeah, but you see, you have the Archbishop of York, for example, saying, well, some people should probably go, but not the bishops, funnily enough, because he's second in command. Now, why shouldn't he go?
I absolutely agree that bishops, we need to be held accountable. If that means that people need to resign, so be it. But I also want to say that what we need to say is, what's our end vision? And our end vision is to change a systemic failure in the church and the culture. If you look back to the culture that is revealed in the Macon report, particularly going back to the 70s, 80s and 90s, that, if I may say so, at that time, a public schoolboy culture at the time, the attitude towards women, to homosexuality.
Well, I was going to say, I mean,
to change.
It is striking that, you know, the 2 bishops who've spoken up in the last 2 days are women. And I wonder whether you think the new Archbishop of Canterbury must be a woman.
I don't think the new Archbishop of Canterbury must be a woman. I'd like to believe that that would be a real possibility. But I think also we have to acknowledge that in the church, is the church ready for that? Is the Anglican Communion ready for that?
Do you think it would survive? Or would it split?
The church?
Yes.
I think that the church has many pressures, and throughout the centuries there have always been things which have divided the church. I do believe we need the right archbishop. I think Justin Welby has done many very good things. I think it is right that he's resigned over this. He, ironically, has brought in many of the changes in our safeguarding culture, but that's not to defend what went on in past years.
I mean, it's also interesting that bishops, like you've just done, are saying he is right to have resigned. I mean, did you tell him to resign?
So I think that a number of us felt it was the right thing for him to do, while acknowledging that he has taken the institutional hit.
But did you tell him before he resigned that he should resign?
I don't think any of us were telling him what to do.
Why not?
His advisors at Lambeth. Well, I think that also highlights the way...
That's a big institutional failure, isn't it?
I think that silence isn't always a sign of things not happening. I think that in the right time, and probably a bit sooner, Archbishop Justin actually resigned, and he's taken a hit for the church, but that doesn't...
But he said twice, you see, that he had spoken to colleagues,
yes,
and as a result of that, he decided not to resign, which suggests they were saying, no, don't resign. So were any of you saying, you've got to go?
So I think a lot of us were saying, through the right channels, yes, this is the time that the Archbishop needs to step back, but recognising that for all the many, many great things he has done, he has taken the institutional hit for this, because we have to put the victims and survivors at the centre of this. And we cannot keep saying we're going to just keep learning. We have got to actually make some significant changes. We've got to look at the independence in our safeguarding structures and processes. Those things need to be addressed. And ironically, it was actually the two archbishops who commissioned the report by Professor Alexis Jay on looking at our independence. We have not moved swiftly enough, and that reveals things in our church about the way we do our governance. Those things have got to change, and we are committed to doing that.
Can I just finally just ask you, do you agree with your colleague, the Bishop of Newcastle, that the language used in a letter by the Archbishop of York with the Archbishop of Canterbury was coercive?
So that is for the Bishop of Newcastle to say how she perceived that letter to be.
You won't agree with that?
I am not going to say. I want to say that we need to ensure that we don't have a muscular Christianity in our church, but actually that is for Bishop Helen Ann to say how she perceived it to be.
Bishop Treweek, thank you very much indeed.